Okay, welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're taking a look at quite a stack of reports covering a really high-profile trial that's been unfolding.
That's right. Specifically, we're diving into recent coverage detailing testimony and evidence presented in the trial of Shaun Diddy Combs.
Focusing on the events of, well, one particular day in court straight from the material you've brought us.
Exactly. The information we're working with today comes entirely from news reports covering those trial proceedings and the evidence shown.
Right. We'll be sticking strictly to what's in these reports.
Just the details shared there.
And our mission for this deep dive is to unpack the key events, maybe some of the surprising details, and the witness accounts from that day.
Pulling out what feels most significant, yeah.
Okay, let's unpack this.
All right.
So just to set the scene quickly, Combs is facing some incredibly serious charges. Racketeering conspiracy, sex trafficking by force, fraud or coercion, and transportation to engage in prostitution. Pretty heavy stuff.
Very serious. And it's important to note right up front, he denies all of these allegations.
Okay.
He's actually been held in prison since his arrest back in September. And according to the reports, his bail requests have been denied.
Right, denied. So on the specific day these reports cover, several key witnesses took the stand.
Correct. We heard testimony from Homeland Security Special Agent Gerard Gannon, psychologist Don Hughes, and a former assistant, George Kaplan.
And the reports also mentioned others who testified previously, like Cassie's mother.
Gina Ventura, yes. And another former assistant, David James.
And they also pointed to who's likely up next, Kid Cudi.
Scott Muscudi, yeah. He's expected soon.
Okay, so let's start with Agent Gerard Gannon. He was apparently back on the stand.
He was. He was detailing his involvement in planning and carrying out the raid on Combs' Miami home last year. March, I believe.
And the scale of this operation, just hearing about it, sounds pretty striking.
It does. Gannon testified upwards of 90 officers were involved just for the Miami raid.
Wow, 80 to 90. Why so many?
Well, he attributed that large number to the sheer size of the mansion itself and, its security setup.
Right. And there was this dramatic detail, too, from photos shown in court.
Yeah, the ones released publicly as well. Officers used a vehicle to actually ram down the gates to get onto the property.
Ram the gates. That certainly paints a picture.
Gives you a sense of the force involved, yeah.
So once they were inside, law enforcement seized quite a few items.
A significant number.
Yeah.
The reports listed things like platform heels, personal lubricant, baby oil, guns, bullets, a whole range of things.
And the photos the jury saw apparently got quite specific.
They did. There were photos of guns found, including one that had a red dot viewer.
What's that for?
Gannon testified it would make targeting easier.
Okay. And this seems like a potentially key point. Gannon also testified that the serial numbers on some of the weapons had been removed.
That's right. Which he said made them difficult or even impossible to trace.
Impossible. What's the potential significance of bringing that detail out in court?
Well, presenting evidence like removed serial numbers, it's often used by the prosecution to suggest maybe an intent to hide the weapon's origin or its ownership.
Right.
It kind of raises questions about why someone might want a gun to be untraceable. It can imply, secrecy or maybe awareness that the items could be problematic.
Gotcha. The photos also showed various drugs found.
Yes. Baggies with rocks of a dark, crumbly substance, plus various pills, pink, blue, white.
And testing confirmed what they were.
It did. Ketamine, cocaine, MDMA, crystal meth, and alprazolam, which is Xanax.
Okay, quite a list.
They also found a box of Vital Honey. That's an erectile dysfunction product. It contains tadalafil, the active ingredient in Cialis, and a green case, apparently with Diddy's name on it, was photographed. The report suggested it might have been used for transporting marijuana.
Okay. And then there was this collection of items referred to as freak-off paraphernalia.
Yes, that term came up in the sources. Photos showed 3 large plastic boxes containing, well, quite a quantity of certain items.
Like what?
At least 26 bottles of Johnson's baby oil and 16 bottles of Astroglide lubricant.
26 bottles of baby oil, 16 of Astroglide. That seems a lot.
It's a notable quantity.
Yeah.
And the reports even mentioned a small detail. 2 rubber duck toys were found in these boxes as well.
Rubber ducks. Okay. Is there any context provided for what freak-off or these specific items might relate to, according to the prosecution?
Well, the reports link the term freak-off to alleged themed parties or events. So the suggestion seems to be that the prosecution is trying to connect these items, and especially their quantities,
The sheer volume.
to the alleged activities mentioned in the charges. Things like the baby oil and lubricant, the amounts found, seem intended to support that narrative.
Got it. And other photos included things like multiple boxes of high heels.
Right, and one box holding a lime bikini alongside some shoes.
So, presenting all this physical evidence from the raid, what's the goal there for the prosecution?
It's really their way of trying to ground the allegations in something tangible, something concrete.
Makes sense.
Showing the jury actual items that they argue are relevant to the alleged conduct. Moving beyond just words.
Okay. Now, beyond the physical stuff, the jury also heard testimony that was meant to provide some context, right, from a psychologist.
Yes, Dr. Dawn Hughes. She testified as what's called a blind expert.
A blind expert. What does that mean exactly?
Her role as a clinical and forensic psychologist was basically to educate the jury on general topics. Things like domestic violence dynamics, sexual assault trauma, traumatic stress.
Okay.
The blind part means she hadn't evaluated the specific people involved in this case. She was just providing general background information about how these situations often play out.
And what were some of the key points she made?
Well, she talked about how it's actually common for people to stay in abusive relationships, how many victims wait months or even years to speak out.
Right.
And she mentioned something called a trauma bond, which can make leaving incredibly difficult.
A trauma bond. Can you explain that a bit more? What is that in this kind of context?
Sure. In this context, she's likely talking about this really complex psychological attachment that can form in abusive relationships. It often involves a cycle, abuse followed by periods of kindness or positive attention.
Okay.
And that can create this powerful, confusing emotional bond that makes it extremely hard for victims to leave, even when they know they're being harmed. It's not about their willpower. It's a recognized psychological dynamic.
Understood. She also mentioned memory, didn't she?
Yes, that victims might not remember every single instance of abuse, but they might vividly recall specific, isolated instances, especially if they're connected to some kind of significant marker event.
Interesting. Now, the defense cross-examined her, right?
They did. The defense attorney, Jonathan Back, questioned her about her training history and specifically referenced a grant she was involved with under the Violence Against Women Act.
Trying to suggest bias, maybe?
That seems to be the implication, yeah. Probing for potential bias towards victims.
How does she respond?
She had a pretty direct answer when asked if she'd ever testified for the defense of a man accused of a sex crime. The quote was, "I don't evaluate offenders."
Okay, pretty clear.
She also confirmed she'd met with prosecutors 6 times, some of those meetings happening since the trial actually started.
But the idea was still that she remained blind.
Right. Both she and the prosecution maintained that they didn't discuss the specifics of this case in those meetings, just general principles.
So what's the defense trying to achieve by questioning her background in those meetings?
Oh, it's a standard strategy, really.
Mm-hmm.
They're trying to challenge her credibility or at least raise questions about her impartiality in the jury's mind.
Even if she's just giving general info.
Exactly. It's about suggesting the jury should perhaps weigh her testimony carefully, consider if there's any potential slant, even unintentional.
Okay. Then the court heard from someone who was allegedly much closer to Combs' day-to-day life.
Yes, George Kaplan, a former executive assistant.
And his testimony started with a bit of legal drama.
It did. He initially invoked his Fifth Amendment right, the right against self-incrimination. Didn't want to testify.
Okay.
But the judge indicated that an immunity order would be signed.
Which means?
Essentially, it compels him to testify. It assures Kaplan that his own statements on the stand won't be used against him in a criminal prosecution.
Okay. But he still has to tell the truth.
Oh, absolutely. It doesn't protect him from perjury if he lies. It's a common legal tool, though, used to get insider testimony, especially in complex cases like this.
So what did Kaplan testify about?
He painted this picture of really demanding work conditions. He talked about working 80 to 100 hours a week.
Wow.
And communicating with Combs daily, basically being constantly on call.
And his tasks involved.
Getting Combs whatever he needed. He listed examples like clothing or potentially food from somewhere or drugs or liquor or an iPad or a speaker, just whatever was requested.
He also mentioned job insecurity.
Yeah, he said Combs threatened his job almost every month.
Every month.
That's what he testified. He even shared this specific story from his very first week on the job.
Oh, yeah.
Apparently, Combs got very close to my face in anger because Kaplan had brought 2 half-gallon water bottles instead of the requested 1-gallon BPA-free bottle.
Over a water bottle.
That's the anecdote he shared. It kind of illustrates the alleged environment, the pressure.
Definitely. Kaplan also talked about setting up hotel rooms.
Yes, he traveled with Combs or sometimes went ahead of him to make sure hotel rooms were set up properly.
And these rooms were booked under a specific name.
Often under the name Frank Black, according to his testimony.
And what did setting them up properly involve? What did he have to put in the rooms?
He listed specific items he was told to pack in a travel bag for these rooms. Clothes, obviously, a speaker, candles, liquor.
Okay, standard stuff maybe.
But also baby oil and Astroglide.
Ah, baby oil and Astroglide again. Hearing that from him and then thinking about the raid inventory.
Exactly. You start to see how the prosecution might try to connect these different pieces of evidence.
Right. His testimony about packing those specific items like baby oil and Astroglide
Could potentially be used by the prosecution to corroborate finding those large quantities during the raid. It suggests these weren't just, random possessions, but maybe items used regularly for specific activities.
makes sense. Did Kaplan talk about cleaning up afterwards?
He did. He described what he'd sometimes find and have to clean up in rooms after Combs had used them. Things like Gatorade bottles, liquor bottles, and, again, baby oil strewn around.
And there was one more specific detail about cleaning up.
A pretty striking one, yeah. He mentioned cleaning up a brown crystallized powder off a countertop on one occasion.
A brown crystallized powder.
I-
Okay. Did he testify about drugs directly?
Yes, quite directly. Kaplan testified to picking up drugs for Combs on 2 separate occasions.
For Combs himself.
That's what he stated.
Yeah.
Once in Miami, once in Los Angeles. He said Combs gave him cash and a number to call.
Did he say what kind of drugs?
One time, he testified it was MDMA. The other time, he said he didn't actually know what the substance was.
So this testimony, if the jury believes it, it goes beyond just personal use, right?
Potentially, yes. It alleges Combs involved his employees in actually acquiring illegal substances, which could be quite significant for the prosecution's broader racketeering case.
Kaplan mentioned when he started working there.
Started with Combs Enterprises in 2013, got promoted to be Combs EA about 10 months later.
And he mentioned something about security changing.
Yeah, a detail about Combs hiring a more professional licensed security group sometime in late 2015, replacing the guards he'd had before then.
And Kaplan was still testifying at the end of the day, covered by these reports.
Correct. He was still on the stand, expected to continue. His whole account as an insider offers this really personal perspective on Combs' alleged behavior, his demands, the whole environment around him.
Yeah, potentially supporting various aspects of the charges.
Depending on how the jury receives it, yes.
The reports also briefly touched on some other testimony we should mention.
Right. Cassie's mother, Regina Ventura, had previously testified about taking out a loan to pay Combs because she said she feared for her daughter's safety.
That's a powerful claim.
And another former assistant, David James, reportedly testified that he saw Combs take drugs and also that he provided Combs with baby oil, lubricant, and condoms for hotel rooms.
So his account echoes some of what Kaplan said.
It seems to overlap on certain points, yes, based on the reporting.
And looking ahead, who's next after Kaplan?
Kid Cudi, Scott Mescudi. He apparently had a brief relationship with Cassie Ventura at one point. He was expected to testify next, likely on Thursday after Kaplan finished.
Okay, that will be interesting to follow.
The reports also just noted, as a side detail, that Combs' sons, Justin and King Combs, were in court on this particular day. Other family members, like his mother and siblings, had attended on other days.
Okay, so stepping back from all these details, what does this all mean? How do these different pieces, the raid stuff, the assistant's story, the psychologist's context, how do they start to fit together in relation to these very serious charges?
Well, it's fascinating, isn't it? You can really see how the prosecution is attempting to weave these different threads together into a coherent narrative for the jury.
Right.
The physical evidence from the raid, those are the concrete items. They're saying, look, here are things potentially linked to the alleged activities.
The baby oil, the drugs, the guns.
Exactly. Then you have the assistant's testimony, Kaplan's testimony. That offers a potential first-hand account.
Right.
Details like being asked to pack the very items found in the raid or cleaning up certain substances.
It connects the items to behavior.
Right. It attempts to corroborate and contextualize the physical evidence, painting a picture of alleged ongoing behavior, demands, the whole environment.
And the psychologist.
Dr. Hughes's testimony provides that general framework.
Yeah.
It gives the jury information about the dynamics of abuse, trauma, memory, victim behavior context they might use when they evaluate the credibility of alleged victims who testify later, or even understand some of the dynamics described by witnesses like Kaplan.
So it's really about building that narrative piece by piece, using these, sometimes seemingly disparate facts.
Precisely. And understanding these specific details like the actual quantity of baby oil found, the instruction to pack it, the description of cleaning up that powder, it's important because these are the building blocks the prosecution is using.
This is how they try to make their case.
It's how the legal system works.
Yeah.
Trying to reconstruct alleged events and patterns of behavior from all these different sources of information, testimony, physical evidence, expert analysis.
So we've taken a deep dive into the source material today, pulling out the specifics from what seems like a pretty significant day in the Combmes trial.
Yeah, covering that raid inventory, hearing the insider account from the former assistant, and getting that context from the expert witness.
What's really striking, I think, is seeing how these distinct types of evidence come together in court.
Absolutely. You have the physical things, the items. You have expert analysis talking about general dynamics.
Yeah.
And then you have these incredibly detailed personal recollections from someone supposedly right there in the environment.
Each offering a unique window.
And the prosecution's job is to show the jury how they all align, how they support the allegations being made.
So maybe a final thought for you, the listener, based just on what we've unpacked from these reports today. Given this variety of testimony and evidence presented, the list of seized items, the psychological explanations, the very personal memories of an assistant, how do you weigh these different kinds of information when you're trying to understand the alleged events being described in a complex legal case like this one? Something to consider.
Definitely something to think about.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. Keep exploring and keep thinking critically about how information is presented and connected in complex situations.